A single whispered word in a crowded street could topple a kingdom. During the Crusades, the real battles were often won by spies, not soldiers. These shadow networks of medieval intelligence agents secretly shaped the outcomes of legendary conflicts, turning the tide of history from the darkness. By the end of this story, you will understand how information itself became the most powerful weapon of the era. How did a letter written in invisible ink change the fate of a city? What kind of person would risk everything to become a master of disguise in a hostile land? What does it truly take to win a war no one knows is being fought? The very first crusade revealed a brutal truth. Faith alone could not conquer distant lands. European knights, clad in heavy armor, found themselves lost in a world they did not understand. They faced unfamiliar terrain, scorching deserts, and opponents who spoke languages they could not decipher. In this environment, a simple rumor about a hidden water source or a whispered warning of an ambush could mean the difference between life and death for an entire army. The initial, chaotic intelligence efforts relied on chance encounters. A local merchant might trade information for silver. A captured soldier under duress might reveal the location of his comrades. A pilgrim returning from Jerusalem could describe the fortifications of a city wall. This was intelligence by accident, a patchwork of gossip and luck. But the most strategic minds of the era, from kings in Europe to sultans in the East, soon realized that relying on chance was a recipe for disaster. They understood that to control the fate of empires, they needed to control the flow of information itself. This was the pivotal moment when espionage evolved from a happenstance tool into a deliberate, organized weapon. Who were the first people recruited for this shadow war, and how did they operate in plain sight? While European knights learned the hard lessons of survival, a far older empire was already playing a far more sophisticated game. The Byzantine Empire, a fortress of ancient knowledge and intricate politics, had spent centuries perfecting the art of seeing without being seen. Their capital, Constantinople, was a nexus of global trade and whispered secrets, and from this hub operated one of the medieval world's first true intelligence networks. This was not a system of chance encounters, but a well-oiled machine powered by a vast bureaucracy. At its heart were the agents in rebus, a title that simply meant men of affairs, but whose true purpose was far more shadowy. These were the emperor's eyes and ears, traveling the empire's great roads as official couriers, tax inspectors, or simple merchants. Their greatest weapon was their anonymity. One might be a humble monk in a Syrian monastery, quietly noting the movement of Seljuk Turk patrols. Another could be a merchant selling silks in a Crusader camp, listening for any hint that these so-called allies might turn their greed towards Byzantine cities. They were masters of disguise and early forms of cryptography, sending reports back to the capital not in plain text, but in clever codes that could turn an innocent-looking trade ledger into a detailed map of enemy fortifications. Their value to the often disoriented crusaders was immeasurable. A Byzantine informant could reveal a hidden mountain pass, saving an army from a deadly ambush in a narrow canyon. Another might explain the complex politics of a local Arab chieftain, turning a potential enemy into a temporary ally. The Byzantines understood that the land itself was a character in this war, and they provided the cultural and geographical intelligence that often meant the difference between a doomed campaign and a successful siege. They demonstrated with chilling efficiency that the most powerful weapon was not always the sharpest sword, but the most timely secret. This proof of concept the sheer force multiplier of organized espionage would not go unnoticed. Soon, a new kind of warrior would emerge from the deserts, one who would take these lessons and refine them into an even sharper instrument of shadow warfare. High in their remote mountain fortresses, the Nizari Ismailis crafted a new kind of terror. Known to history as the assassins, they understood a fundamental truth about power. It was not just about winning battles on the field, but about winning the war inside the minds of your enemies. Their intelligence network was not a sprawling bureaucracy like the Byzantines. Instead, it was a surgical instrument, a dagger of deception honed to a razor's edge. Its power lay not in its size, but in its terrifying precision. An assassin agent was the ultimate sleeper. He might arrive in a city as a humble servant, a pious scholar, or even a mercenary soldier. He would spend not days or months, but years embedding himself within a ruler's inner circle. He would become a trusted face, a reliable pair of hands, all while patiently waiting for the single order that would define his mission. Then, in a crowded throne room or a quiet garden, the strike would come. It was never a chaotic massacre. It was a single, devastating blow against one man, the commander, the sultan, the king. The physical act was shocking enough, but the true genius of their system was the psychological aftermath. The murder of a prominent leader sent a chilling message to every other ruler in the region. If the assassins could reach a man surrounded by his most loyal guards inside his own fortified palace, then no one was safe. This pervasive fear became their most potent weapon. A Crusader lord, hearing of such a death, would suddenly see traitors in every shadow. He would distrust his own advisors, delay crucial military decisions, and become paralyzed by suspicion. This climate of distrust was a contagion that weakened enemy command from the inside out, often doing more damage than a lost battle. And this atmosphere of paranoia, expertly cultivated by the assassins, created opportunities that other spies were quick to exploit. While the assassins wielded fear as a blade, another organization forged a weapon of an entirely different kind from the heart of the Crusader states. The Knights Templar began as pious warriors sworn to protect travelers on the road to Jerusalem, but they soon became something far more powerful. They evolved into the medieval world's first truly multinational corporation, and their most valuable asset was not their swords, but a sprawling, secretive intelligence network built on faith, finance, and absolute discretion. Their system was anchored in a chain of fortresses and trading posts known as preceptories and commanderies. These were not just military bases or monasteries. They were nodes in a vast information grid stretching from London to the Levant. A merchant's rumor overheard in a Templar house in Paris could be cross-referenced with a report from a brother in Acre, creating a comprehensive picture no single kingdom could match. The Templars themselves were the perfect agents. Many were educated, could speak multiple languages, and moved with ease in their roles as diplomats, bankers, and logistical masters. A Templar brother negotiating alone with a European king would simultaneously be assessing that kingdom's political stability. Another, arranging the safe passage of a pilgrim caravan, would be mapping out the latest movements of enemy patrols. They gathered everything from grain prices in Egypt that could predict an army's ability to march to the secret alliances between rival Muslim emirs. Their revolutionary financial power supercharged their espionage. They could bribe officials with a generosity that kings could only dream of, and they operated a private courier system so fast and secure that it became the preferred method for monarchs to send sensitive messages. A letter locked in a Templar chest moved with the protection of the order, making their communication lines the most reliable in the known world. The Templars grasped a profound truth that would echo through the centuries. In a land perpetually at war, true influence was not merely about controlling territory, but about controlling the twin levers of information and capital. They built a financial intelligence complex that allowed them to influence events without ever drawing a sword, creating a blueprint for statecraft that modern intelligence agencies would recognize instantly. This fusion of money and secrets gave them unparalleled power, but it also cast a long shadow, making them as many enemies among their Christian rivals as among their Muslim foes. Saladin understood that the most powerful army was useless without the right information at the right time. While the Templars built a financial empire and the assassins cultivated fear, this legendary sultan wove a different kind of web, one spun from the trust of ordinary people. His network was not a single organization but a constellation of informants, each chosen for their unique access and invisibility. A Bedouin tribesman whose life was dictated by the desert winds could report on Crusader patrol movements across the vast, empty spaces. A Syrian merchant haggling in the markets of Jerusalem could overhear the grumblings of Frankish lords and gauge the morale within their castles. Even disillusioned Crusader knights, disheartened by the greed and infighting of their own leaders, sometimes found a more honorable cause in Saladin's service, providing priceless details about European battle tactics and castle defenses. This diverse network gave him a panoramic view of the political and military landscape, but his true genius lay in how he used that information not just to observe, but to actively manipulate his enemies. His agents became masters of psychological warfare, expertly feeding lies and suspicions into the already fractured alliances of the Crusader states. They would whisper to the Prince of Antioch that the King of Jerusalem was planning to betray him, and then assure the king that the Count of Tripoli was secretly negotiating with Muslim forces. These carefully planted seeds of discord grew into a forest of paranoia, preventing the Crusaders from uniting against their common foe. This strategy of division set the stage for his greatest triumph, a masterpiece of intelligence applied on the battlefield. Saladin knew that in the scorching heat of the Levant, an army marched on its stomach, but it fought and died by its access to water. His spies confirmed that the Crusader army, led by King Guy of Jerusalem, was planning a desperate march to relieve the siege of Tiberias, a grueling trek across a waterless plateau in the peak of summer. Saladin's agents had done their work perfectly, having helped lure the Crusaders onto this exact fatal path. As the Christian knights advanced, choked by dust and maddened by thirst, Saladin's scouts monitored their every agonizing step. They set grass fires to fill the air with smoke and ash, worsening the army's suffering. By the time the Crusaders stumbled within sight of Lake Tiberia's shimmering blue waters, they were surrounded, demoralized, and utterly defeated before the first arrow was even loosed. The Battle of Hattin was not won by swords alone. It was won by the whispers of merchants, the signals of tribesmen, and a deep, strategic understanding of human weakness, all orchestrated by a leader who knew that to control the story was to control the outcome. A secret message is worthless if the wrong person reads it first. This simple, terrifying reality forced medieval spies to become masters of invention, crafting a hidden world of communication that operated right under the noses of their enemies. Their toolkit was a blend of brilliant simplicity and clever complexity, designed to make the vital appear mundane. The most common tool was the substitution cipher, where each letter in a message was replaced with another according to a prearranged system. A spy might write the word attack as ZSSZBJ, a jumble of nonsense to any interceptor who did not possess the key, but the most sophisticated agents went far beyond simple letter swapping. They developed complex codes based on religious texts, where a seemingly pious passage from a psalm or a verse from the Quran could actually contain detailed instructions for an ambush or the location of a secret meeting. To an enemy censor, the document was an expression of faith. To the intended recipient, it was a battle plan. For messages that needed to be completely invisible, spies turned to the chemistry of the everyday. They wrote with invisible inks made from lemon juice, milk, or even their own saliva. A blank piece of parchment, when held over the heat of a candle flame, would magically reveal its true contents as the organic compounds in the ink browned and became visible. Some agents even used a device known as a cipher disk, an early mechanical tool consisting of two concentric circles, each engraved with the alphabet. By turning the disks to a prearranged alignment, a user could quickly scramble an entire message. The recipient, possessing an identical disk set to the same key, could just as easily decode it. Yet all these clever methods were useless without a secure way to deliver the message. This is where the trusted courier became the most critical link in the chain. These men, and sometimes women, were chosen for their anonymity and their ability to move without suspicion. A monk on a pilgrimage, a merchant with a caravan of goods, a minstrel traveling between courts, all could carry a hidden message sewn into a robe, rolled inside a scroll, or simply memorized. The entire system, from the cipher to the courier, transformed raw, dangerous information into a secure and actionable commodity. It was a constant, silent arms race, a battle of wits where every new method of concealment prompted a new method of detection. And as these shadow networks grew more sophisticated, they began to leave a permanent mark, not just on the battles they won, but on the very structures of power that would emerge from the Crusades. A successful spy did not just wear a costume, they became the character. The art of disguise was a profound psychological transformation, a complete immersion into a new identity that could mean the difference between gathering a world-altering secret and a swift, anonymous death. These agents were the ultimate actors on a stage where a single misstep meant the curtain fell for good. To infiltrate a Muslim city, a European operative had to do more than just wrap himself in a robe. He had to learn the intricate courtesies of a society he was raised to see as the enemy. He needed to know the proper prayers, the subtle gestures of respect, how to eat, how to bargain, and how to walk without drawing a second glance. Every detail mattered: a poorly told story about his fictional hometown, a misplaced reaction to a local custom, or a strange accent when speaking Arabic could unravel his entire mission in an instant. Conversely, a Muslim agent penetrating a Crusader castle might pose as a converted Christian, a physician offering his services, or a captured slave forced into labor. His survival depended on his ability to project humility, loyalty, or specialized skill, all while his eyes and ears were constantly absorbing the layout of the fortress, the morale of the garrison, and the private conversations of its lords. This required a deep, almost intuitive understanding of social hierarchies and unspoken rules. A merchant who was too pushy would be remembered. A pilgrim who asked too many questions about troop movements would raise suspicion. The most effective spies were masters of blending in, not standing out. They knew that true invisibility came from being utterly ordinary, a face in the crowd that inspired no curiosity. Their greatest weapon was not a hidden dagger, but a perfectly rehearsed sigh of boredom, a genuine seeming laugh at a local joke, or a convincing display of pious devotion. They built trust through 1,000 tiny, authentic-seeming performances, making their final betrayal not just a strategic victory, but a deeply personal one. This chameleon-like ability to earn confidence was their primary shield. Yet even the most perfectly crafted disguise was useless if the spy could not reliably send what they learned back to their masters. The entire perilous performance hinged on one fragile human link, the courier who had to be just as cunning and twice as lucky. A single courier galloping through the night carried more potential power than a company of knights. These men and women were the living, breathing arteries of the Shadow War, their journeys a constant gamble against time, nature, and human suspicion. Every rustle in the bushes could be a bandit, every stranger on the road an enemy scout, every sandstorm a potential grave. Their survival depended on a bag of clever tricks designed to make the vital look utterly worthless. A pilgrim's wooden staff might be hollowed out, a secret scroll tucked inside where no one would think to look. A merchant's chest could have a false bottom, hiding coded messages beneath a layer of common spices. The most intimate hiding places were often the best, with thin sheets of parchment sewn into the lining of a tunic or hidden within the binding of a prayer book. But speed was just as crucial as secrecy. Some intelligence networks, particularly the highly organized Templars, established covert relay stations. At a remote monastery or a sympathetic farmstead, an exhausted courier could pass his message to a fresh rider already mounted on a fresh horse. This system of human and animal relays could move information across vast distances with a speed that rivaled the official post, turning a week-long journey into a matter of days. The entire enterprise was a testament to desperation and ingenuity. A king's decision, an army's movement, the fate of a city under siege, all hung on the stamina of one rider and the hope that his humble belongings would not be searched. This silent, desperate race was the heartbeat of espionage, a pulse of information that connected isolated agents to the distant powers they served. And as these networks proved their worth, the men who commanded them began to realize that the secrets they gathered could be used for more than just winning battles. They could be used to build legends. A king could field 1,000 knights, but if his treasury was empty, his army would simply melt away. The real front line in the long war for the Holy Land was often the marketplace, where the price of grain or the safety of a trade caravan could decide the fate of a kingdom. This was the shadowy realm of economic espionage, where spies fought a silent war not against soldiers, but against an enemy's purse. Their mission was simple and devastating: to bankrupt their foes before a battle could even begin. Agents would infiltrate port cities and trading hubs, not to steal military secrets, but to uncover the financial lifeblood of their rivals. They sought the maps of lucrative trade routes carrying silks and spices. They identified the vulnerable sources of key supplies, like the forests that provided timber for siege engines or the farms that fed entire cities. With this information, they could launch attacks that were invisible but crippling. A well-placed bribe to a customs official could result in strangling taxes being levied on a rival merchant faction, making their goods too expensive to sell. A few whispers in the right taverns, rumors of a fleet of pirates lurking off the coast, could be enough to scare an entire season's worth of trading vessels into staying in port. The most valuable intelligence of all might be the sailing schedule of a ship from Italy, its hulls packed not with soldiers, but with silver coins to pay the garrison of a Crusader castle. Intercepting that payroll was as decisive as winning a major battle. An army that went unpaid would soon desert, their loyalty evaporating along with their wages. A fortress low on funds could not repair its walls or stock its granaries. By systematically sabotaging an opponent's economy, a single spy could force the surrender of a city that had never been breached, proving that the most powerful siege weapon was sometimes a ledger book. This cold calculus revealed a permanent truth of conflict, that gold was the constant, universal soldier, and the battle for resources was forever intertwined with the battle for victory. Every source was a potential lie, and every piece of information a possible trap. In the morally ambiguous world of medieval espionage, the double agent was the ultimate wild card, a player in a game where the only rule was to survive. These individuals lived in a constant state of duality, their loyalties fractured by greed, a twisted sense of ideology, or the simple, desperate need to stay alive. A Christian knight, disillusioned by the corruption of his own lords, might secretly accept gold from a Muslim emir, feeding him just enough truth about Crusader troop movements to maintain his value. At the same time, a respected Muslim scholar, fearing the rise of a rival faction, could be in the pay of a Crusader baron, offering cultural insights in exchange for protection. Their greatest skill was curation, the art of carefully selecting which secrets to sell and which to keep. Revealing too much to one side would expose their value and end the flow of payment. Revealing too little would make them useless and invite suspicion. They had to maintain a perfect, precarious balance, feeding just enough valuable intelligence to both masters to remain credible, all while ensuring neither side gained a decisive upper hand that could end the war and their lucrative role in it. The psychological toll was immense. Every friendly greeting from their official commander was a test. Every secret meeting in a darkened alley carried the risk of a knife in the back. They lived inside a shell of their own making, a prison of their own lies where a single slip of the tongue, a single moment of misplaced trust, meant a brutal and public death. For the spymasters who controlled them, this was the highest stakes chess match imaginable. They had to verify every scrap of information a double agent provided, often by cross-referencing it with reports from other, unrelated sources. They would feed their asset small, specific lies to see if those lies appeared in the enemy's actions. Trust was a currency they were never able to spend, only invest with extreme caution, always ready to liquidate the entire operation with a single order for assassination. This pervasive atmosphere of deception created a fog of war thicker than any desert sandstorm. A commander could never be sure if the battle plans on his table were a gift from a loyal spy or a poison pill from a double agent designed to lead his army into an ambush. Victory or defeat could hinge on a single, unverifiable whisper from a man who had sworn two conflicting oaths. A commander's greatest fear was not the enemy at his gates, but the enemy in his own ranks, the creeping dread born from a whispered lie. Psychological operations turned rumor into a weapon, shaping reality long before armies ever met on the field. A spy's most critical mission often began not with a stolen document, but with a carefully crafted story planted in a tavern, a market, or a soldier's campfire. These agents were architects of perception, building prisons of paranoia from nothing but words. They would circulate tales of a trusted captain plotting treason, shattering the unity of a command structure. They might spread panic about a sudden plague outbreak within a besieged city's walls, weakening the defenders' will to resist. In one decisive moment, a persistent rumor of a colossal Muslim army, its numbers growing with every retelling, convinced an entire Crusader column to abandon a strong defensive position and retreat in disarray, handing a bloodless victory to their opponents. The reverse was equally powerful. To bolster their own forces, these same agents disseminated stories of divine visions or prophecies of certain victory, forging a shield of faith and confidence around their troops. They would exaggerate an enemy's losses or highlight internal squabbles, making their own side feel stronger and more resolute. This war of words was a brutal calculus of human emotion, a low-cost tactic with the potential to dismantle an enemy from the inside out. It proved that the most vulnerable point in any fortress was not its walls, but the minds of the people defending them. The very ground an army stood upon could be made to feel unstable through nothing more than a well-told story. This timeless understanding that truth is often the first casualty of war cemented the spies' role as a true weapon of mass disruption. The city of Edessa was considered an unshakable bastion of Christian power, a fortress so secure its leaders grew complacent behind its mighty walls. But walls are only as strong as the will of those who guard them, and by the year 1144, that will had crumbled into a heap of political bickering and arrogant neglect. Imad ad-Din Zengi, a brilliant and ruthless commander, saw this weakness not with his own eyes, but through the eyes of the many agents he had planted inside the city. His spies were not just soldiers in disguise, they were the merchants who supplied the city's grain, the travelers who shared news at its taverns, and perhaps even minor officials within its own administration. They reported everything back to him, the exact locations where the fortifications were poorly maintained, the bitter arguments between the city's ruling families, and the general belief among the Frankish knights that Zengi was too preoccupied with other wars to ever threaten them. This was not just information, it was a complete psychological and tactical profile of a dying patient. While Zengi's web of informants painted a perfect picture of Edessa's vulnerabilities, the city's own defenders willfully blinded themselves. They dismissed urgent reports from their own scouts about the massing of Zengi's army, chalking it up to exaggeration or rumor. They failed to patrol the surrounding lands with any real diligence, and they made no concerted effort to root out the very agents who were sealing their fate. Theirs was the ultimate intelligence failure, a catastrophic mix of arrogance and inattention. When Zengi's forces finally moved, they did not waste time with a long, grinding siege. They moved with the chilling efficiency of someone who already possessed the key to the front door. His troops exploited the weakest sections of the wall. His strategies targeted the most divided factions within the leadership, and his timing capitalized on the defenders' utter lack of preparedness. The conquest was shockingly swift. The fall of Edessa sent a tremor through Europe, directly provoking the call for the Second Crusade. But the real lesson was written in the silent work of the spies who made it possible. It proved that a kingdom can be hollowed out from within long before the first stone is cast from a catapult. The parched ground of the horns of Hattin became a testament to the power of a well-placed lie. While the fall of Edessa demonstrated the consequences of ignoring intelligence, the Battle of Hattin in 1187 showcased its ultimate potential as an offensive weapon. Saladin's victory was a masterpiece painted not with broad strokes of cavalry, but with the fine, invisible brush of information. His network of spies had done more than just observe. They had actively crafted the reality in which the Crusader king, Guy of Jerusalem, would make his decisions. They provided Saladin with a complete portrait of his enemy, the exact number of knights, the composition of their infantry, and the fragile alliances between their proud, quarreling barons. But the most critical piece of intelligence was environmental. Saladin knew with absolute certainty that any large Crusader army marching across the barren plateau in the heart of July would be marching toward its own thirst-maddened demise. His agents then supplied the crucial lie, a deceptive piece of information that convinced King Guy this desperate gamble was his only viable option. They presented a path to relief as a trap disguised as a solution. As the Frankish army advanced, their progress was a slow, agonizing spectacle meticulously monitored by Saladin's scouts. The Muslim army, perfectly supplied with water from Lake Tiberias, simply watched and waited. They set fires to the dry grass, choking the Crusaders with smoke and ash, amplifying their suffering. By the time the desperate Christian knights caught sight of the lake's shimmering blue waters, they were surrounded, disorganized, and utterly broken in spirit. The actual fighting was almost a formality. The true battle had already been won days earlier, in the quiet whispers that guided a doomed army into the desert. Hattin stands as the purest example of tactical intelligence, a case where knowing the enemy's weakness was infinitely more valuable than having 1,000 extra swords. This relentless pursuit of information was slowly transforming the very nature of power, creating a new class of advisor whose influence was felt in every throne room and war council. The 2-year siege of Acre was a war of attrition fought on two fronts, the physical walls and the invisible sea. This sprawling blockade became a sprawling intelligence operation, a slow, grinding contest where the winner would be the side that could best manage the flow of men, grain, and secrets across the Mediterranean. Both the Crusader camp and Saladin's surrounding forces were constantly probing for weakness, their spies acting as the nerves of these two exhausted giants. A fisherman's boat slipping past the Crusader fleet at night might be carrying a Muslim agent with a coded plea for reinforcements from Egypt. A merchant vessel unloading at the Crusader-held port of Tyre could be disembarking a Christian operative with news of political turmoil back in Germany, intelligence that could either bolster morale or shatter it completely. The stalemate was absolute, a test of logistical endurance where a single intercepted supply ship could mean the difference between starvation and survival for an entire army. Then the balance of information shifted dramatically with the arrival of new players. King Richard the Lionheart of England and King Philip Augustus of France did not just bring fresh troops and mighty siege engines, they brought sophisticated intelligence networks from their home courts and a new, aggressive approach to the shadow war. They immediately established their own courier lines back to Europe, demanding more resources and gathering the latest political gossip that could be used to manipulate their own allies and undermine their rivals. Within the besieged city of Acre, Christian spies who had perhaps been posing as Arab merchants or even as servants within the garrison sent out desperate reports. They detailed the plummeting morale, the critical shortages of food and arrows, and the growing desperation of the city's defenders. Outside the walls, Crusader agents disguised as Bedouins or desert traders monitored the roads, reporting on every Muslim caravan attempting to run the blockade and every movement of Saladin's relief armies. This constant two-way stream of intelligence allowed Richard and Philip to tighten their grip with surgical precision. They knew exactly when to press an assault and when to hold back, their strategies guided by whispers from inside the city itself. The eventual fall of Acre was not just a military victory, it was an administrative and espionage triumph. It proved that sustaining a complex web of informants and communication lines for months on end was as critical to victory as any act of battlefield bravery. Endurance in the shadows had finally broken the deadlock. A holy man's robe could conceal more secrets than a king's vault. In an age defined by faith, religious figures moved through the world with a unique kind of immunity, their sacred vocations providing the ultimate disguise for the shadow trade of espionage. Monks, priests, and imams were granted access to every stratum of society, from the mud-floored huts of peasants to the gilded halls of royal courts, and their perceived piety made them the last people anyone would suspect of carrying deadly intelligence. A Christian monk traveling from England to Jerusalem was not a spy in the eyes of the world. He was a pilgrim on a sacred journey. Yet his route would take him past countless castles and through strategic mountain passes, and his devout observations could easily include a mental inventory of garrison strengths and the state of key bridges. His written account of the spiritual journey sent back to his monastery might contain coded descriptions of everything he witnessed, all hidden within a narrative of prayer and miracle. On the other side of the conflict, a Muslim scholar or a Sufi mystic enjoyed the same freedom. He could travel freely between the emirates of the Middle East, carrying messages between Saladin's commanders. These dispatches were not written on plain parchment, but were woven into complex theological debates or commentaries on the Quran, their true meaning accessible only to a recipient who knew which verses to read between the lines. The sanctity of their office was their greatest protection. A soldier at a city gate might think twice before demanding a priest open his satchel, fearing both divine wrath and the anger of his own superstitious commander. This unspoken protection gave religious agents a liberty that merchants, who were frequently searched and taxed, could only envy. Yet this very advantage created a profound and troubling moral conflict. These men were leveraging the trust placed in their holy office to conduct acts of deception that could lead to thousands of deaths. Was it a righteous act to use the cloak of God to serve the needs of a king or a sultan? Could a lie be sanctified if it served a greater cause? This ethical dilemma, the volatile fusion of faith and subterfuge, forced these agents to wrestle with their conscience in a way a common soldier never had to. They were not just betraying enemies, they were potentially betraying the very principles they were sworn to uphold, a tension that echoes in the complex moral landscape of modern intelligence. A queen's whispered counsel could be as decisive as a cavalry charge. In the shadows of the Crusades, women moved with a unique and potent form of power, operating in the intimate spaces where men could seldom tread. Official chronicles written by monks and male courtiers often erased their contributions, but the secret records of espionage tell a different story. A noblewoman hosting a banquet for Frankish lords and Arab diplomats was not merely a figurehead, she was a collector of secrets. Her ears were tuned to the unguarded conversations that flowed with the wine, the subtle alliances formed over shared platters, and the casual boasts of knights that revealed military plans. In the private chambers of a castle, a servant woman mending a lord's tunic or delivering his meal was invisible, and that invisibility was her greatest asset. She knew which barons were feuding, how low the grain stores had fallen, and whether the garrison's loyalty was beginning to waver. This intelligence, passed through back channels to a spymaster, was often more current and reliable than any scout's report. Some women commanded entire networks. Melisende, Queen of Jerusalem, was not just a ruler in name. She was a brilliant political strategist who wielded informants and advisors to outmaneuver her rivals and secure her throne for decades. She understood that the court was a battlefield of whispers, and she excelled at that war. For women of lower status, the risks were even greater. A merchant's wife running a stall in a busy market could note the comings and goings of caravans and soldiers, her observations dismissed as woman's gossip until they were coded into a vital report. The penalty for discovery was brutal, often twisted into accusations of witchcraft or treason, charges designed to utterly destroy their credibility and their lives. Their work was deniable, dangerous, and absolutely essential. To ignore these hidden figures is to misunderstand the very nature of medieval intelligence, a realm where influence was not always seized with a sword, but sometimes won with a carefully placed word in the right ear. This silent, pervasive influence demonstrates that the architecture of power was far more complex than the stone of castles, built on a foundation of personal trust and social access that these women uniquely possessed. Their legacy is a reminder that the most effective spy is often the one nobody thinks to watch. Every whispered secret invited a silent hunter. As spy networks wove their intricate webs across the Holy Land, a new defensive art emerged to tear them apart. This was the world of counterintelligence, a desperate race to hunt the hunters before they could strike. For every ruler, the security of their throne now depended not just on gathering secrets, but on protecting their own. The most direct method was the interrogation of a captured agent. This was less about crude torture and more about a battle of wits and wills. An experienced spy catcher would look for inconsistencies in a prisoner's cover story, the small details that a fabricated identity could not hold together under relentless questioning. They might use psychological pressure, offering promises of freedom or gold in exchange for the names of other agents, turning a captured spy into a double agent working for the other side. Beyond the interrogation chamber, spymasters became weavers of elaborate deceptions. They would plant false battle plans in places they knew an enemy agent would find them, leading entire armies into carefully prepared ambushes. A seemingly disgruntled official might complain loudly about a non-existent weakness in the city's northern wall, only to have enemy sappers arrive that very night to find a regiment of archers waiting for them. This created a hall of mirrors where no piece of information could be trusted at face value. Inside the courts and army camps, a pervasive paranoia took root. Trusted advisors, even battle-hardened generals, could suddenly fall under a cloud of suspicion based on a rumor or a reported late-night meeting. Purges were conducted to find moles, sometimes based on real evidence, other times on little more than the fevered imagination of a fearful king. In response, basic security protocols became essential for survival. Passwords to enter a command tent were changed not weekly, but daily. Access to strategic plans was restricted to a tiny, vetted circle. A knight who asked too many questions about supply routes might find himself reassigned to a remote outpost, his curiosity deemed a potential threat. The successful unmasking of a single, well-placed spy could save a city from being betrayed from within or protect a king from a poisoned cup. This relentless, silent war within the war meant that for every brilliant spy, there was an equally determined spy catcher, and the conflict was forever balanced on the edge of a lie. A master spy could bring down a fortress wall without ever touching a stone. The great siege engines of the age, the monstrous trebuchets and lumbering towers, were only as effective as the intelligence that guided them. Before a single rock was hauled into place for a catapult, spies had already completed their own invisible siege, mapping every vulnerability of the target. They needed to know precisely where a wall was thinnest, having perhaps bribed a disgruntled stonemason or a guard who walked the battlements every night. They sought the hidden postern gates used for secret sorties, the paths to the castle's underground water sources, and the exact morale of the men defending the ramparts. Were they well-fed and confident, or were they already on half rations and whispering of surrender? This was not just observation, it was a deep, diagnostic analysis of a living system. Every piece of this information directly shaped the assault. A report of low morale might convince a commander to forego a costly direct attack in favor of a prolonged blockade, letting hunger do the work for him. The discovery of a particularly weak section of wall would become the primary target for the trebuchet crews, who would pound that single spot relentlessly until it crumbled. Knowledge of the terrain dictated where the massive, wheeled siege towers could be safely rolled into position, and the most secretive operation of all, mining, was entirely dependent on spycraft. Sappers digging a tunnel to undermine a foundation needed to know exactly where to start and which way to dig to reach the most critical point. A single error based on bad information would mean weeks of backbreaking labor wasted, with their tunnel collapsing or missing the mark entirely. The defenders, of course, were not passive victims. They fought back with a shadow war of their own. Their agents would slip into the enemy camp, posing as deserters or traders to spread disinformation. They might whisper false tales of an impregnable underground spring, convincing the attackers that a siege was hopeless, or, more directly, they would attempt to sabotage the siege engines themselves. A well-placed bribe to a carpenter could result in a critical beam in a siege tower being secretly weakened, causing the entire structure to buckle under its own weight when it was finally moved. This created a constant, hidden duel where the fate of a castle could hinge on which side better controlled the narrative of its own strength. This fusion of intelligence and engineering reached its ultimate expression in the construction of counter-castles. A fortress like the legendary Crag des Chevaliers was not built on a random hill. Its placement was the result of years of accumulated geographical and military intelligence. Spies had identified the most strategically vital pass to control, the line of sight needed to observe enemy movements for miles, and the exact angles from which an assault could be launched. The thickness of its walls, the design of its concentric defenses, and the layout of its storerooms were all direct reflections of learned threats. These great stone fortresses, therefore, are not merely monuments to military engineering. They are permanent archives carved in rock, each towering wall and hidden passage a silent testament to the spies whose reports made them possible. The very landscape of the Holy Land was reshaped by this hidden knowledge, proving that the most enduring victories were often drafted on parchment long before they were ever carved in stone. The final Crusader banner fell, but the methods of their shadow war did not fade into history. They migrated, carried in the minds of diplomats, merchants, and mercenaries returning to a Europe on the cusp of the Renaissance. The chaotic intelligence efforts born of desperation in the Holy Land were now studied, codified, and professionalized. The most significant innovation to cross the Mediterranean was the concept of a permanent embassy. No longer were envoys just temporary messengers sent for a single negotiation. They became resident agents, living for years in foreign capitals, their official duties providing the perfect cover for building lasting networks of local informants. A Venetian ambassador in Constantinople was not just a diplomat, he was his city-state's chief intelligence officer, tasked with understanding everything from the Sultan's health to the mood of the Janissary Corps. Alongside this new diplomatic frontier, the cryptographic tricks of Crusader spies evolved into a standard tool of statecraft. The simple substitution ciphers used to hide messages in a merchant's ledger were refined by Italian cryptographers into complex systems that could protect the secrets of popes and princes. The understanding that a kingdom's wealth was a critical vulnerability, a lesson hammered home in the markets of the Levant, became central to European power struggles. Rivals now sought to sabotage each other's trade routes or trigger banking crises, recognizing that a bankrupt enemy was a defeated enemy. This transformation cemented a profound and permanent shift in the nature of power. Information itself was now recognized as a sovereign asset, as crucial to the security of a state as its armies or its treasury. The dusty roads between Acre and Jerusalem were the training ground for a new kind of professional, one who fought his battles not with a sword, but with a carefully placed whisper and a talent for seeing the truth in a web of lies. The Crusades, in the end, forged the very template of modern espionage. The Hollywood image of a cloaked figure leaping across rooftops is a thrilling fiction, but it obscures a much more compelling truth. The real medieval spy was far more likely to be a nervous merchant haggling over the price of linen than a master of acrobatics. Their true weapons were not poisoned daggers, but a sharp memory, a convincing lie, and the ability to blend into a crowd. For every legendary assassin, there were 100 anonymous informants driven by motives we can all understand. A captured soldier might turn informant to avoid execution. A bankrupt trader would sell secrets to feed his family. A pilgrim, disillusioned by the violence he witnessed, might offer guidance to the other side out of a twisted sense of mercy. Their daily existence was a tapestry of mundane tasks punctuated by moments of sheer terror. It was the long, dusty journey on a bad road, the cold fear when a guard asked one too many questions, and the soul-crushing loneliness of living a lie for months or even years. The ever-present threat was not a dramatic sword fight, but the slow, agonizing death that awaited anyone caught betraying a king or a sultan. This reality makes their actions not less impressive, but more so. It was the courage of ordinary people placed in impossible circumstances. Take the popular legend of the assassins. While they were undoubtedly skilled and feared, their reputation was amplified by their enemies. A Crusader commander who lost a key battle could easily blame his defeat on the supernatural cunning of these shadowy killers, rather than his own tactical blunders. This propaganda served a dual purpose. It explained away military failures and demonized the opposition. In reality, the assassins were a deeply religious community with specific political goals, and their infamous killings were calculated acts of political theater, not random acts of terror. Their power stemmed as much from the fear they cultivated as from the blades they wielded. When we strip away the folklore, we are left with a portrait of human complexity. These were not one-dimensional villains or heroes. They were individuals making difficult, often morally ambiguous choices in a brutal world. Recognizing their humanity does not diminish their impact. It deepens our understanding of the immense personal cost behind the secrets that shaped history. Their true legacy lies not in mythic feats, but in the quiet, desperate bravery of the common person who dared to become a shadow. A holy war fought with unholy methods created a crisis of conscience that echoed in every whispered secret. For the man who knelt in prayer at dawn and then spent his afternoon forging a lie, the path to salvation was fraught with moral peril. How could an act of deception, no matter how strategically vital, be reconciled with a faith that preached truth? This was the impossible question haunting the corridors of power and the tents of the common soldier. On both sides of the conflict, religious scholars wrestled with divine text, searching for justification. Some Christian clerics argued for a brutal pragmatism, declaring that since their Muslim opponents were outside of God's grace, any tactic used against them was not a sin but a righteous necessity. They framed the spy not as a liar but as a divine instrument, his deceptions a form of holy cunning. Yet other voices within the church were deeply troubled, warning that to fight evil with its own tools was to risk losing one's own soul in the process. A similar debate raged in the Muslim world. While some Islamic jurists endorsed intelligence gathering as a form of necessary military preparation, the deliberate breaking of an oath or the assassination of a leader under a flag of truce was seen by many as a profound violation of ethical principles. The very agents who operated in the shadows felt this tension most acutely. A Christian knight turned informant had to reconcile his chivalric vows of honor with the fact that his entire mission was built on a foundation of dishonesty. A Muslim agent who had spent years pretending to be a convert to Christianity to gain access to a Crusader court would have to confront the spiritual stain of his public apostasy, wondering if God would ever forgive the sacrileges he was forced to perform for the greater good of the community. This was not an abstract philosophical debate. It was a daily, grinding conflict within the human spirit. The pressure to succeed for king and country warred with the fear of eternal damnation. This moral morass is perhaps the most enduring and human legacy of the Shadow War, a stark reminder that the greatest battles are often not fought for territory, but for the soul. And this internal struggle over the ethics of information would ultimately force a revolutionary shift in how power itself was structured, moving it slowly from the hands of warriors to the minds of administrators. A secret delivered at the right moment could build a kingdom, while a whisper withheld could destroy one. The political landscape of the Levant was a constantly shifting mosaic of fragile alliances, and intelligence was the glue that held them together, or the wedge that drove them apart. Spies were the essential instruments of this high-stakes diplomatic maneuvering, their missions carrying not just offers and threats, but the very framework of power itself. Consider the complex and often tense relationship between the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Byzantine Empire. On the surface, they were fellow Christians, natural allies against a common Muslim foe. In reality, they were rivals, each deeply suspicious of the other's territorial ambitions. Their entire partnership hinged on a delicate dance of information. A Byzantine agent's report confirming Crusader plans to attack a shared Muslim city could prompt the emperor to send troops and gold, strengthening the alliance. That same agent's report, if it instead revealed Crusader lords plotting to seize a Byzantine port, would instantly freeze relations, recall ambassadors, and turn a tentative friend into a guarded enemy. The flow of intelligence dictated every move. A well-timed piece of information, perhaps an intercepted letter showing a Muslim emir's weakness, could convince a Christian baron to temporarily ally with a rival emir to crush their mutual problem. Conversely, a spy's fabricated tale of a secret betrayal, artfully planted in the right ear, could shatter a decade-long truce overnight, sending armies that had once shared a feast back to the battlefield. In this environment, trust was a currency spent cautiously, and every ambassador was a potential spymaster. The map of the Holy Land was redrawn not only by the charge of knights, but by the silent, calculated exchange of secrets between courts, where a single agent's assessment could redefine the borders of power for a generation. This constant reordering of loyalties created a world where no victory was ever permanent, and the only true constant was the silent, relentless work of the agents who moved between the lines. A single broken code could unravel an empire. In the high-stakes world of medieval espionage, success was never guaranteed, and the cost of failure was measured in blood and lost kingdoms. For every master spy who changed the course of a battle, there was a counterpart whose mistake, betrayal, or simple bad luck led to catastrophe. The collapse of an intelligence network was a slow-moving disaster, a creeping blindness that left commanders groping in the dark. A captured courier, subjected to the brutal persuasion of the age, was more than just one man's tragedy. He was a node in a fragile web, and his breaking could lead interrogators to his handlers, his fellow agents, and the safe houses they used. This chain reaction of betrayal could result in the overnight dismantling of a network that had taken years to build, culminating in mass arrests and public executions meant to terrify any who would consider the same path. Even more insidious was the double agent who had been turned. A spy believed to be loyal might, under threat or for greater reward, begin feeding his controller a carefully curated blend of truth and lies. This poisonous information would then be used to craft military strategy, leading an entire army to march confidently into a landscape that had been transformed into a killing zone. The ground itself became a lie, and soldiers paid the price for a deception they never knew existed. Perhaps the most common failure was simply getting it wrong. The inability to accurately gauge the size, speed, or skill of Saladin's mobile forces led to several disastrous Crusader defeats where outnumbered Frankish troops found themselves surrounded and annihilated. Without reliable scouts or trustworthy local informants, a commander was left with only rumors and pride, a combination that often proved fatal. When the flow of secrets stopped, the silence was deafening. A king would sit in his war council, staring at a map that was suddenly obsolete, forced to make decisions based on guesswork and desperate hope. The price for this intelligence vacuum was the fall of a city like Edessa, the loss of a strategic castle, or the obliteration of an army at a place like the Horns of Hattin. These moments of breakdown underscore the immense, crushing pressure on the spymasters and their agents. Every decision they made, every source they trusted, every message they sent, carried the weight of thousands of lives. The Shadow War, for all its silence, was never clean, and its true currency was human destiny. He was the ghost in the machine of power, the unseen hand that guided the flow of secrets. While kings and sultans took public credit for victories, the Spymaster worked in the silence behind the throne, bearing the immense burden of orchestrating the entire Shadow War. This role demanded a chillingly unique set of skills, a fusion of a psychologist's insight and a grandmaster's strategic foresight. A Spymaster's first and most critical task was recruitment. He had to be an expert in human weakness, scanning the crowded streets and busy courts not for the strongest warriors, but for the most useful vulnerabilities. A merchant drowning in debt could be turned with a bag of silver. A disgraced knight hungry for redemption might be swayed by a promise of restored honor. A servant nursing a secret grudge against their master was a potential fountain of information. The Spymaster assessed each candidate not for their loyalty, which was always fragile, but for their predictability and their access, building a mosaic of agents from the broken pieces of human ambition and despair. Once his network was active, the Spymaster was then drowned in a chaotic flood of information. Reports would arrive from a dozen different sources, each with its own perspective, its own bias, and its own potential for deception. His greatest skill was sifting this mountain of whispers for the few nuggets of actionable truth. He would cross-reference a merchant's rumor from Damascus with a scout's visual report from the hills and a coded message from a double agent in the enemy's war council. A single inconsistency could reveal a carefully laid trap or the existence of a mole within his own organization. He lived in a state of perpetual, calculated suspicion, trusting no one completely, not even his most valued operatives. Figures like Saladin's chief advisor, Al-Fadl, were masters of this dark craft. From his quiet study, Al-Fadl coordinated the vast constellation of Bedouin scouts, merchant informants, and turncoat knights that fed Saladin his unparalleled intelligence. Similarly, unnamed masters within the Templar Order directed their financial and logistical intelligence apparatus with cold efficiency. These men left few personal records, their triumphs and failures erased to protect the secrets of the state. Their legacy was written not in chronicles, but in the outcomes of battles they never fought and the sieges they won from 100 miles away. The Spymaster was the ultimate architect of the invisible war, a puppet master whose strings were made of human trust and betrayal, and whose every decision echoed with the lives of thousands.